Ports constitute an important economic activity in coastal areas. The higher the throughput of goods and passengers year on year, the more infrastructure, provisions and associated services are required. India is the 16th largest maritime country in the world with a coastline of about 7,517 kilometers. Since about 95% of India's trade by volume is via the maritime route, there is a continuous need to develop India's ports and trade-related infrastructure to accelerate growth in the manufacturing industry and to assist the Make in India initiative. There are, however, several regulatory challenges which are stumbling this growth.
On one hand, we are talking about Sagarmala, 6 lakh crores of investment, and on the other side, we see, when the budgets are made and the subjects what are discussed in the parliament, we hardly find maritime coming there, So at the end of the day, if we have 7,500 kilometers of a coastline and only 12 major ports, we really can't achieve big. The talks can be there on the papers, but to see it on the ground happening, I think it has to be a kind of a revolutionary kind of approach by state governments and central government on the same plane. And I hope it happens soon.
The capacity addition at ports is expected to grow at a compound annual growth rate of 5 to 6% till 2022, thereby adding 275 to 325 megatons of capacity. How does the industry look at the sector and the expectations it has from its partners, the government and others in the private sector is what this episode of India Risk Report will explore.
Hello and welcome to another episode of India Risk Report. And in this episode, we are looking at port and coastal security, reference the maritime trade, which is big in India in as much as it's big for most countries. In fact, the transportation and the use of maritime links is something which is relatively a much cheaper and a much more flexible method of adopting volume trade. And India has a huge coastline, and India has a maritime initiative which would see in the next several years India having something close to 189 ports being added on to already what our port list is, with an investment of rupees $1.42 trillion, which really translates to 22 billion US dollars. But there are challenges to maritime security and coastal security, and we have two experts with hands-on understanding of what it means to ensure that maritime trade and maritime security is addressed comprehensively. We have Commander Abhijit Singh, former naval officer, but now a senior fellow at the ORF and looking after maritime issues there. And you've written extensively about it also, I'm told, and look forward to your views. And we have Captain Rajesh Deshwal, Chief Executive Officer of Darya, which is a ship management company and which looks at various issues from manpower management to arranging for more ships for the growing requirement for the Indian economy. Now, I'd like to throw this question to you, Commander Abhijit. What do you think really is at the heart of our maritime coastal security not getting the attention that it should? Is it that we lack vision or an understanding or the resources, or most importantly, the will to actually implement effective maritime initiatives, particularly in the aftermath of the 26/11 attacks on Mumbai and the fear that this is an area which could be very easily accessible to those who want to upset India's agenda?
Right. So a lot of things that you mentioned are all true. To an extent, the problem of maritime security, or rather coastal security, is that we somehow haven't been able to get our systems in order. We did a study at the ORF about a year back in which we studied most of these aspects that you've mentioned. And we found that one of the problems in coastal security is that while the central government seems to have some kind of vision and idea of how to move things forward, somehow they don't seem to be getting the same kind of support from the state governments. And while the Indian Navy and the Indian Coast Guard seem to have pretty much upped their game as far as coastal security is concerned, in the sense there's greater coordination, better exercises, all of that, infrastructure is building up. The coastal police still is an area of concern. The coastal police is not sort of rising to the occasion. And our sense was that there is unwillingness among the local police to be very involved in matters of coastal security. But that is purely coastal security. With port security, I would say the issues are that there is a regulatory deficit. As per the regulations, these ports are supposed to follow what is called a comprehensive commercial security plan. And that is something that none of these ports have really developed. The major ports have, but now since about 30 to 40% of our trade is carried out through the minor ports, these are the ports where we're finding that the security systems are not so much in place.
Okay, so that's a very comprehensive answer, but I think there are two issues that you've talked about, and one is ports and one is minor ports. And I want to go to Captain Deshwal for this, because what I need to understand from you is facts that are available with me, that India doesn't have the large volume absorbable ports that India would ideally like to have to offload more sea-based cargo coming in. Now, I'm told this leads to effort, waste of time, extra money, because they go to other ports which have capacity to unload that large cargo, and then it's loaded onto ships that can get into the Indian ports. So, is there a movement happening either as part of the Sagarmala initiative or any other initiative to ensure that at least we have large enough ports to bring in the stuff that we think is essential for our economy?
Certainly. Well, the Sagarmala project is basically an inland water project, which is a different subject altogether compared to the
It doesn't concern the coastal.
It does. But when we are talking about the coastal ports, until recently we had a very little focus on the coastal port development. We have only about 12 major ports. There are several ports which are coming up now, and in fact the recent economic survey report, which was presented in the Parliament, states that our present market share of about $160 billion will grow to about $215 billion by 2020, which means a CAGR of almost 10.5% growth in this sector. So a sector which was long neglected earlier is now actually gaining momentum. So it will be incorrect to say that there is no focus. There is definitely a focus, so much so that even the World Bank Logistics Performance Index report has placed India in a position ranking 34th in the world, as against 54 4 years back. So there is 20 place jump. So definitely there is a progress in this segment which is happening. There's no denying the fact. But whether we are able to cope up with the requirements, which is in terms of technology, in terms of manpower, in terms of infrastructure, whether we are able to deal with the speed of the growth is a question mark. And because we are growing so fast, it is becoming a very lucrative sector also. And it is attracting a lot of dangers because it is vastly exposed. Indian coast, Indian ports are vastly exposed. So there is not only a security threat, a safety and security. These are two different aspects. When we are talking about security, it is mostly to do with Indian Navy, Coast Guard, Coastal Police. They are involved in this. But what the administration and the industry needs to do is manage the safety aspects of the vessel.
Okay, so safety and security is what I'm told you have written about.
Yes, exactly.
And you've done an extensive paper on this subject, and there is a paradox between safety and security in your view. What is that?
Okay, before I come to the paradox, let me just mention this. The basic problem, if you look at port security, which you just mentioned, and Rajesh gave a very comprehensive response to that, is that it implicates two things. One, it implicates regulation, and the other, it implicates technology. On both these areas, both these fronts, there has been a lag as far as we are concerned. The ISPS code, which is the International Ship and Port Facilities Code, which was really drafted after the 2001 attacks in the US, actually says that there is a certain number of measures, security measures, that must be provided by the port authorities. Now, in our case, what's happened is that there is a little bit of a regulatory deficit in which the responsibilities of the port authorities, as compared with, say, the terminal operators, with the government per se, the maritime boards, has not been defined very clearly. And therefore, the port operators don't take much responsibility as far as providing these security measures on the terminals is concerned. Secondly, because we don't take the whole paradigm of security, this comprehensive paradigm of security seriously, means we don't have much of control over the access points to the port. It is secure, but it's not very secure. And in a number of drills that have been carried out, including by one exercise done by the RIL a couple of years ago, the Reliance Industries Limited at Jamnagar, they found that it was possible for these facilities to be infiltrated. But if I can just finish that, the second issue is technology. We don't have those X-ray detection, radiation detectors that will actually scan through all of those containers. And as per the ISPS code, if you are not doing that, you are creating vulnerable points.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was coming to, that are there enough regulatory mechanisms in place for ports and the coastal areas to ensure some minimum standards of use of technology and manpower skills are adopted as a standardized procedure?
I would say yes, but the problem is implementation. The biggest problem today that we face is implementation. I will give you an example. Today, when we supply manpower on the ship, there are close to 550 RPSL agencies, of which about 475 are registered in Mumbai alone. Now, the Indian-owned ships do not require RPSL agents. These RPSL agents are required, or rather they have the license to provide manpower only to foreign ship owners. Now what happens is, it is so easy to access or to board a vessel. If one can imagine what happens if a terrorist boards a vessel laden with oil and use the ship as a weapon. Now, it is very easy for these people to get onto the boat because the RPSL agencies, they can get their license very easily, although DG Shipping has their regulations, but it is very easy to get RPSL licenses. Any person can obtain the certificates of competency very easily, can board the ships, and they can go and use the vessels as a weapon of mass destructions. So how does one have a control over these?
But you know, sorry to interrupt, but can't India say, on our coastal area, whatever the other RPSL requirements, but these additional requirements have to be adhered to?
You have a very valid point, and I wanted to touch base on this as well, because cabotage law in most of the countries is very strictly implemented. We do have this law in India also, wherein we have a percentage of Indians to be on the Indian flag vessels when they are coasting Indian coast. We should rather make it even more stringent, because it is easier to control if an Indian person is on the Indian coastal vessels, managing the Indian vessels. It is easy to monitor. It is easier to track these individuals. But if you give access to the foreigners to come and work on these ships which are along the Indian coast, then we are risking ourselves.
No, but I mean, you made an important point, but I think to sum up is, you can give them access, but they still have to adhere to the laws of your land. I mean, that's the standard rule anywhere in the world. I mean, I go from here to United States. I can't insist that the US would treat me as a citizen of India, but completely dismissive of US laws. You have to. So I think there is a disconnect here. You brought that point up, and I think those who would be watching the show would realize there is a need to adhere to that. But after break, we'll come back and look at more important issues such as what are the other strategic dimensions of maritime trade, coastal security, and how we can address those. But that after break. Welcome back. We continue to look at port and coastal security, and we have our two experts with us still, Commander Abhijit Singh. There is an area which I think, I'm sure you would have given it some thought, and I need some crisp advice on this. In terms of operational growth of port security, could you elaborate on some of the measures that could be taken by Indian shipping, which has and can ask for naval or military protection, particularly in the light of the growing menace of piracy in some of the most important maritime trade routes?
Right. So there are two or three things that immediately come to mind. In the study that we carried out, we found that when it comes to port security, one of the issues that always comes up for discussion and that's rather controversial is the security of the single point moorings, the SPMs. Now, the fight is actually between the Coast Guard and the CISF, and that in some ways is also symptomatic of the problem that we face, which is that agencies are not willing to take up what they think they can't do. Now, the Coast Guard is really supposed to do this as per the Coast Guard Act of 1978. But the Coast Guard says that the CISF is really the agency that's supposed to be doing this. And the CISF says that we actually don't have the training, we don't have the assets to go and provide security to these. So one of the first things that we need to do is again come up with comprehensive, clear regulation on whose responsibility is what in the field. The second area that I think we need to look at is interagency cooperation. It is better than what it used to be since 2008, but I still hear that there are problems when it comes to coordinating responses, especially with the coastal police. And the coastal police, as I was telling you, recently there's been a proposal made to make something known as a coastal border police force that will be a centrally controlled police force. Now, a lot of practitioners will tell you that this is not really the right way to do things, because the coastal police is really a key cog in the wheel. The coastal police is who has the knowledge of the networks that exist, the intelligence networks that exist. And these are the people that actually need to be plugged into more security. So I would actually suggest that the government needs to look at ways in which we can involve the police more in coastal security measures and coastal security initiatives. And lastly, I think what's also important is that we are setting up a lot of these radar stations. 43 have already been set up under the CCS scheme. The first scheme, we have plans for setting up another 38. But from what I hear from Coast Guard officers when we did the report is that the real problem isn't so much electronic surveillance and electronic intelligence, it's human intelligence. We are not really getting the human intelligence that we need. And also we are too focused on the fact that we shouldn't have a repeat of the 2611 incident. I think we need to have a broader approach to security. 2611 is one thing, but there's other things also that happen. There's pollution happening, there's illegal fishing happening, there's trafficking happening, and for all of that the intelligence can again come from the police. So rather than take something like a coastal border police force, which is basically a low grade Coast Guard which is going to be equally ineffective, let's look at other ways in which we can bring in the people that matter.
No, I completely agree with you. There's a need for a comprehensive national approach, because at the end of the day it's national security and national interests and the national economy, all of it clubbed together as far as coastal and port security go. But Captain Deshwal, there's another dimension to this all, and it actually, the answer of Commander Abhijit leads me on to this question. That is that where is the role that the private sector sees for itself in terms of coastal security and ports and port management? Because the government takes its own time to come up with next set of implementation of ideas once the ideas are accepted at the highest level. But there is room for PPP, public-private partnership. And what kind of room do you see that happening? Do you see some ports becoming a private enterprise, just like airports have become? And to what extent would that give government-led enterprises a run for their money?
Yeah, there are several ports which are on a PPP model today operating in India, and they are definitely doing better than the ports which are under the government. Talking about safety, what the industry can do, it is very important today to see the motivation level of the seafarer who is out at sea. From the time the person, as I was talking about the RPSL agencies and the companies who are putting people left, right, center out at sea, Our industry is not free from the corruption as any other industry. There is a lot of corruption happening also, especially in terms of recruitment. So we have these people who go on board and they are not secured, because a good company will have their own systems of recruitment, they will have their own processes, whereas these people, they are easy targets, they go on ships and they can be very, very easily manipulated to cause damage, to be a security threat. Another point that I would like to highlight is whenever a foreign vessel is coming to India, there is no means of check. There is no means of checking these vessels in the territorial waters. They just make a VHF call and they come all the way to the port, and that is when immigrations or the customs or whoever boards the vessel to inspect the vessel. Now we have no idea if this vessel is coming from our neighboring countries or wherever, and what risk they are bringing into our nation and what damage they can do to the country. We have no idea about that. Talking about coastal, as you rightly mentioned also, the police stations and all, we can gather local network, local intelligence, which is good for our coastal and which is good for our domestic trade. But the international trade wherein foreigners are coming in, foreign flag vessels are coming in, how do we address that? How do we check that? That is a question mark.
Well, it's very important. It's, I mean, and you may like to also comment on it, but other than that, I want to link up a question that on a strategic level, we've just been having deals now with countries in Asia like Iran and Oman to give us port facilities. Now, those port facilities are largely seen as military-related port facilities. But could we use those ports also extensively to enhance maritime trade and maritime activity?
Well, it could. In practice, we could use those ports to enhance our maritime activity. But it said that we need to get our processes in order. And this kind of loops back to the point that Rajesh was making some time back, is that really speaking, we have to have clarity over what kind of security measures are going to be provided by the port operator, and what kind of security do we expect the shipping company to provide. Now that division is made in other ports, is made in other countries. In a lot of other countries, the regulation is clear about who does what in the event of a contingency. And I can give you an example of the Chennai oil spill. When the Chennai oil spill happened, there were no tier 1 facilities available in 2017. And the reason that didn't happen is because the oil company hadn't really provided those tier 1 facilities, even though they were supposed to. So I'm saying before we try and look at using other ports, we have to be sure that we're able to provide these facilities in our own ports. The more important thing is that the law actually does not force any government to do anything. It simply says that the responsibility for the governments for enforcement is simply that they should incorporate that whatever is there in the law in the domestic legislation, and we haven't done that. When we start doing it in our major and minor ports, then we can start thinking of doing it in ports abroad. And then
a quick question: why haven't we done it till now?
This is a question that actually beats me, because this is pretty straightforward. We should have done it, but I think that there is a great disagreement between the port operators and the shipping companies over who should take responsibility for the things that we must do to provide that security. And I think in some ways, in the way that we've taken merchant shipping seriously, we've only recently revised the Merchant Shipping Act and provided some ad hoc means by which these security measures can be provided. But we need a comprehensive commercial security strategy that looks at all these things.
Captain Deshwal, one is the point that he's just raised, that there is a disagreement between merchant shipping companies and the government as to who should take how much responsibility, and I'd like you to throw more light on it, that where the stumbling blocks are. But I think equally important is for you to actually tell us that since at the end of the day, shipping is your core business, and shipping is something that can only expand, and others will also engage with you better if you provide a much more comprehensive environment, comprehensively covered environment in India. Where do you feel, and some suggestions from you would be welcome, where do we feel we can make short-term quick measures and long-term perspective planning to actually move it up really to the next generation of ports, security and shipping?
Shipping is a very complex industry. It is not as simple as one may think, because if you're talking about automobile industry or whatever, you have a local regulation. Within India, your rules apply. But in shipping, it doesn't happen so. Because in shipping, there are international rules and regulations. There are Indian rules and regulations. There are probably coastal rules and regulations. There is a fishing department, fishery department, the environmentalist, and all play a very important role. So to bring all of them under one banner, under one umbrella is a big challenge, will always remain. It is not an easy task. When he was talking about the incident, we were, unfortunately, one of our ship was involved in that incident. And the law so says that the polluter pays. So even if the fault is of somebody else, he collides with us, the polluter pays. We pay. So these are some unfortunate rules which have been tagging along for a very, very long time, which really needs a review. And the government definitely can take stand, and they say that this is the law of the land. This is what I want in my country. And the question is, what supersedes what? Whether the international rule supersedes or the coastal rule supersedes, that is for the government to take a call. Analyze, do proper risk assessment, commercial assessment, and then take a call. And if they want, definitely it can be done, because a lot of movement is happening in DG Shipping's office. We see a lot of e-governance taking place. A lot of bottlenecks have been cleared. A lot of process automation is taking place. And we have seen these changes in last 2-3 years. So definitely, if there is a will, there is a way, it can be done. And we industry people are more than happy, more than willing to contribute our free time, to contribute our time to the cause of the safety and security of the nation.
So a quick question, and I want both of you to say yes, no. And that is that you have repeatedly mentioned that last 2 to 3 years, 3 to 4 years, that means a dramatic set of changes have taken place only in the last 2 to 3 or 4 years, or this is part of the ongoing changes which have been implemented now? Yes, no.
In the last 2-3 years, yes.
Well, I would say in the last 2-3 years, yes, but not really as far as port security and safety is concerned.
Yeah, that's an ongoing saga.
That's an ongoing saga. And if I can just finish with this, my last line is going to be this, that the one area where I'm actually critical of the central government is that a lot of focus is given on expanding capacity, ease of business, providing services, not so much on safety and security, as it doesn't really matter.
Okay, so on that relatively unhappy note, we need to end this discussion, but thank you very much for your inputs. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, goodbye.